Hello, welcome to our event. Thank you so much for joining us to discuss Shahé Mankerian's debut collection, History of Forgetfulness, which takes readers to 1975 Beirut, where an uncivil war is brewing. Mankerian asks, who said war didn't love the children? Setting the tone for a darkly humorous collection in which memories of love, religion, and childhood are entangled among street snipers and bombings. Reviewers have said Mankerian never leaves a reader unengaged, and he unspools in devastating simplicity and directness in seemingly inconsequential scenes the horrors and suffering of children, parents, neighbors, schoolmates, friends, lovers navigating daily bombardments, scavenging for food, dodging snipers' bullets, and trying to find a modicum of normalcy among the ruins. Shahé is the principal of St. Gregory Hovsepian School and the director of mentorship at IALA, the International Armenian Literary Alliance. His collection, History of Forgetfulness, has been a finalist at the Bibi First Book Competition, the Crab Orchard Poetry Open Competition, the Koertge Review Press Poetry Book Award, and the White Pine Press Poetry Prize. You can purchase the book through Fly on the Wall Press in the UK or Abril Books in Los Angeles. Tonight, our conversation will be hosted by Dr. Koertge Chilingirian, who is a sociologist and an associate of the Faculty of Oriental Studies at Oxford University, specializing in Armenian and Middle Eastern studies with a particular focus on identity politics, religion, and homeland diaspora relations. He is also the director of the Armenian Diaspora Survey. Previously, he was the director of research and programs on Eurasia at Cambridge's Judge Business School. We will be live streaming this event on Facebook, so feel free to ask questions in the comments or here in the chat or live after the discussion. Thank you so much, Dr. Chilingirian, for hosting this conversation, and to Shahé for sharing this searing collection with us. Without further ado, Koertge, I will let you take it from there.
Thank you, Olivia, for the introduction, and thank you, Armenian Institute in IALA, for the pleasure and the privilege to converse with Shahé Mankerian, who speaks not only from his heart, but also speaks for all those of us who were born in Lebanon and shared many of the experiences that he portrays in his poems. Shahé, you have given us a compelling, very powerful collection of poems that really penetrate into the flesh, as it were, into the bones of the reader. In a way, it shakes the reader to the core. You bring the reader sort of into the intimacy of your world, where the memory and the experience of the Lebanese civil war is projected. You project this on our mental and emotional screen, as it were. Sort of, it is a silent movie, a black and white film, the background of the war. But your voice, your live narration of what's happening, give color the images and animate the characters that you speak about and present, and the objects. At the beginning of your book, there is a very powerful quotation from Khalil Jibran about injury, and I want to quote that here. It says, if the other person injures you, you may forget the injury, but if you injure him, you will always remember. In a way, this sets the theme of the collection of poems, and it opens the gate into your world, into your emotions. So I want to ask and start with the question, why did you choose this quotation from Jibran?
Wow, thank you, Koertge. And thank you, Armenian Institute and IALA, for making this possible. Good question. Why Jibran? First of all, why Jibran? Jibran, to me, symbolizes Lebanon and America. And interestingly, coincidentally, Jibran left Lebanon when he was 12 years old and came to America. And that's the connection I have with him, because I was 12 when I left Beirut and came to America. And Jibran wrote, once he came to America, he changed his language to English and he started writing English. But his first language was always Arabic. The same situation, I think, is with me, where my first language is Armenian, yet I chose to write in English. Coming to the opening of the book, the injury and remembering and forgetting, obviously the whole book has to do with, there are parts of my life I want to forget, but I can't. And there are parts of my life that I do want to remember. And that dichotomy that Jibran puts there in that opening remark is the fact that, yes, you want to forget when you're injured, but you will never forget the fact that you're injuring somebody else. And like you said, this book plays with that constantly. Who's being injured and who's getting injured, and who is doing the forgetting or who's doing the remembering. I just felt like it's a wonderful way to honor Jibran and to start this collection with that theme. As you said, it's the theme of the book.
Yeah, wonderful. And perhaps we could start with the first poem, if you could read it, Educating the Sun, and maybe talk about that a little bit after you read it.
Sure. Educating the Sun. I got my schooling at the morgue, a summer job my mother thought would keep the streets out of her son. It was a booming business, death. The year was 1975. A civil war was brewing, and morticians needed a better help. I was in charge of clipping nails. All toes and fingers had to look pristine. With rubbing alcohol and cotton balls, I cleaned and washed dry blood from children with no legs, from men who went to work at dawn and never found their way back home. Their faces like soles with their faces like shoes with no soles. I smiled because I didn't know another way to deal with shock. Some afternoons I sat on slabs of marble, eating feta cheese on moldy bread, and watching wives identifying faceless men as mates, and mothers who, like doves, descended slowly on their sons' decapitated corpses. Then I wondered if my mother would look for me when the evening came. Would she remember that I was her only son and that I cleaned boys my own age? I witnessed death before I could live. Mother, stay awake. Don't look for him among the dead. He lives. He lives. He lives.
Wow.
Yeah.
I
Interesting.
think, yeah.
The interesting thing about this poem, first of all, it was never meant to be the first poem in the collection. When I first put the manuscript together, it was buried somewhere in the middle. And I showed it to a friend and mentor, Susan Loomis, who was my teacher as well at some point at UCLA. She said, this poem has to be first. You have to open the book with this poem. And it was a great idea, I think, to shift, to move. And the point is, you have to show your work to other people before you publish it. And I think one of the great feedbacks that I received was this, to open it with this poem.
Yeah, and I think in a way, this first poem declares the thematic world that we're going to come into through the book. This is, like I said, the kind of the gate, going into the gate. And it's so powerful because one feels the physical brutality of the civil war, the killings, the death, and the destruction seen from a child's point of view. So many a times people think that poetry is this beautiful and enjoyable and emotional world, but you kind of freeze the reader's mind for a second, where this death and destruction of the war is in the face. So maybe, I mean, how take us into your emotional and mental world when you wrote, for instance, this poem. How did you kind of years later dip into that difficult memory of the experience of the war and tried to express it through your poems?
Well, I mean, you have to remember that my memory stops at the age 12, because that's when I came to Los Angeles. So the only memory I have is a memory of a child. And writing this book, I knew that the voice had to be a child's voice, because for so many reasons. First of all, I love the simplicity of language that, sometimes poets and writers forget that there's power in simplicity. We were talking earlier, you and I, and the group of us were talking about Zahrad. Zahrad, the Armenian poet, his whole power of writing is on that simplicity and childhood language, that playfulness that comes with writing and with words. And I wanted that. I wanted that playfulness to be there, even though your topic is, or the topic that we are discussing is war and the brutality of war. And it could have been, I personally, if I had used the lens of an adult, I think it was going to be very heavy-handed. It was going to be maybe judgmental, but I wanted to keep that simplicity, that childlike lens to decipher war to an adult reader. Yes, there are parts where, as an adult, I am looking back and holding the hand of that child, but in general, it is the child. The mission was to keep that childlike wonderment about what was happening around me as a person.
Yeah. And perhaps this is a good time to talk about your childhood, actually growing up in Lebanon, in an Armenian neighborhood. I mean, you often invoke in your poems your father, or the image of the father, the mother, the parents, and in the Middle Eastern context, it also has a particular place and meaning or implications. So maybe we can talk a little bit about that, but also you use as reference and invoke the flesh, the body, the human flesh, to transmit the physical sensation, the physical discomfort of emotions faced with the war and the killings and so on. And perhaps here, if you could read us one or two poems that would give us a deeper understanding of your world, as it were.
Yeah, I would like to read the poem called Homecoming, which, if I'm not mistaken, is the next poem. And you're right, the family, mom, the dad are very much present in this collection throughout the book. And what I wanted to make the reader understand, and again, this is the adult looking back, when you have a war, growing up in a war, that war, the brutality of war starts seeping into the home. As much as you try to close the windows and the doors, it's going to seep in. And what I was trying to create in some of these poems, that not only there was a battle going outside, there was a battle happening within the walls of our apartment. That's one. The other thing is that as a child, you're constantly trying to create this perfect world for your parents, because you can sense their stress, you can sense their anxieties. And it's interesting that the child is now wearing this cloth to, or this armor to protect the parents and the mom and dad. So this poem, Homecoming, is about my father primarily, and me trying to, or my brothers and I were trying to create this perfect world for them. It's called Homecoming. We heard the bang of the blue gate leading to the lobby, then the scuff of his soles against the granite staircase. The Moroccan maid stopped sweeping when he reached the second floor landing. She moved to the side, avoided eye contact, and murmured, "Marhaba." Father leaned against the railing and forced his hernia belt into place. Then we heard the jingle of the keys and the kick of the misplaced dustpan near the floor mat. I waited by the door with his leather slippers. My brother practiced the piano. We wanted him to think he was stepping into something perfect.
Shahé, speaking of the father, I think quite a lot of your poems has the father character. I mean, whether it's biographical or you're using it as an image, the father as an image. But there's also a sense of troubled relationship with father. It's a common scene in a number of your poems where the father figure, as we know in the Middle Eastern context, there is brutality in the relationship, whether, in other instances, it's the patriarchal, kind of the machismo, the male chauvinist dominates the scenes in your poems. So do you want to talk a little bit about that, this father figure and this kind of tense and troubled relationship with the father?
Yeah, again, it was something that you and I were discussing from our childhood as well earlier, that yes, the understanding of fatherhood in the Middle East or Lebanon, especially, I was telling you about my father's journey. My father was born in Haifa. There was the war, 1948. They were forced to leave Haifa, Palestine, and go to Beirut. And this man now had to start over again with his family in Lebanon. And then right when he was trying to establish himself, another war starts in 1975. So I can't imagine the psyche of a man who's constantly on the move, and then he moves to Los Angeles. However, another friend of mine said, there's no excuse. There's no excuse for a father to behave the way they do, or fathers the way they do. One image that I can never forget is the one that I described in a poem called Mount Sannin, Picnic at Mount Sannin. Is we were at a picnic and we were all sitting there, and another father who I'm watching, and remember, as a child, you're watching these men, and unfortunately, those are your first examples of adulthood, adult male. And this man, for whatever reason, and I will go into it in the poem, behaved the way he behaved. And this was probably, I was 9 years old or 8 years old, and I remember this. And I could never forget. To this day, I'm 50 some years old now, and I still remember that moment. And I will read that to you.
Yeah.
Picnic at Mount Sannin. 37 years later, I still remember the slap, the gasp of the guests, and your wife hiding her face between her palms. You kicked the picnic chair and stumbled away. I stared at the chop parsley tucked between your wife's fingers and the beads of sweat above the bridge of her nose. No one comforted her. I wanted to, but I was too young and had a slingshot dangling in my hand. She fixed her apron and added crushed wheat to the tabbouleh. When she walked to the hillside well to haul a jug of water, you managed to lower yourself and sleep under an olive tree. There were too many birds chirping above your head. I wanted to kill all. I didn't know if you slapped her because she forgot to offer you buttered sesame bread or place ice in your arak. But you slept comfortably all afternoon, surrounded by flowers, as your wife served us humbly with red cheeks.
Shahé, I want you to also read Homecoming, Fifth Day.
Okay.
You read Homecoming, but you have another one called Homecoming, Fifth Day. And then we'll continue the conversation.
Sure. Homecoming, fifth day. She was gone for 4 days. Father knew she'd come back to feed his boys. Every morning, he cracked some eggs and squeezed blood oranges. We didn't clean the table because we kept waiting. He drove to work and we walked to school at opposite directions. We held hands to cross streets, but refused to discuss the fight, even though Dad finally hit her. We fried more eggs for dinner. On the 5th day, when we got home, she had cleaned the dishes, wiped the table, and the kitchen seemed full of steam from the pressure cooker.
Here, I think again, if we juxtapose, you have the father, this figure that we talk about. Then when you talk about the mother, it's the tender, it's the presence. She's the anchor, the powerful presence in the home. But also, like in this poem, she's powerful in her absence, as if her power and value is felt when she's not there physically. So this is, again, I think, particularly in the Middle Eastern context, when we talk about men and women, there are these stereotypes. But maybe if you can expand on this, the mother figure, the female, the woman, and how it fits into your sort of poetic expressions.
Yeah, very good question. My mother, I mean, she was a wonderful woman. She was a storyteller. And a lot of the humor or a lot of the wordplays that I have comes from my mom. One thing that to me in the book symbolizes my mother perfectly is the pressure cooker. And it appears quite a few times within my mom poems. And that's exactly how I see her, this woman about to explode. You know, it's that pressure cooker that it's like you have that heat on and you hear that whistling of I don't know if some of you might not be aware of what a pressure cooker is, but that was that was part of my life growing up.
Presto, they used to call it presto.
Presto. And it was that, I mean, that symbolized she came to America and she brought the pressure cooker with her to America. And she used the same pressure cooker, and man, that sound of that thing whistling and that's her. Like she was constantly about to erupt, I felt like. And she did. I mean, there were moments that she did erupt. She did walk out. She did said, I can't take this anymore, and walked.
Yeah.
But she would come back. She would come back because of her children. And that's, I mean, that's the perfect analogy of what an Armenian woman was when I was growing up. All of us had that mom where she took the abuse, but she came back. I mean, God bless them. That's all I have to say about what I witnessed.
Shahé, before we move on, do you want to read a mother's prayer? Since we're talking about mothers, I think it's a wonderful piece of
Mother's prayer. I'm trying to
30, page 38.
Page 30. Thank you. 38. This is a sonnet, and I wrote this during when I was doing my graduate work, and it follows the rhythm of the sonnet, iambic pentameter, a very Shakespearean form. So, dear Lord, your Sunday sky is glazed by frost. Your handiwork is underneath the bridge. Your sons are guilty of a Holocaust. My husband's upper half is in the fridge. His feet are still beneath concrete and steel. I want to find his shoes, his fingernail. He wore your cross around his neck to seal his faith. He must have entered heaven frail, his soul divided like the traffic, east away from west. I haven't stitched his head. It's frozen, Lord. I asked the local priest to resurrect my husband from the dead. I might be selfish, but you've let a man die, split. I want my husband, Lord. Amen.
Wow. Shahé, I wanted to ask you, because you invoke this image from the beginning, the first one, and then a few times, fingernails, the image of, I mean, it's quite powerful and disturbing in many ways. So tell us a little bit about what do you try to convey through that image?
Yeah, I don't know what it does come up quite a few times in a lot of the poems, but one of the things about fingernails is it's a tool that we have. It's this, we don't think about much about this tool but without fingernails, you're going to come, you will become, life is going to get a little bit difficult if you don't have it, or if you don't have them. But it also, it covers dirt. It's you, sometimes that's what, even if it's the most polished fingernail, there might be dirt underneath. So that metaphor of something that is so perfect, we come back to that idea of something so perfect has some dirt underneath if we start uncovering it, or if you, so to me that it's one of those words that I love using in a poem. Just like I love the word shoes. You see the word shoes a lot because it has the word souls in it, and you can play with that word. You can play with the word fingernail too. It becomes finger. Then nails can have double entendre. So
yeah,
that's what it is. That's where it comes from.
Yeah, I think another beautiful experience the reader has is that although probably you've written these at different times, chronologically speaking, but you take us into a journey like from your childhood into your teenagehood, into your teenage years, where your reflection is a little different on what you see and what you experience. Maybe we can talk a little bit about that, how you're becoming a teenager in the background of the Civil War, And I liked two poems, if you want to read one of them or both of them. One is called Books, and then the other one is called Moses, which is, I think, gives us a flavor of that, the naughtiness, and then you're becoming into a new world, as it were.
Yeah, and I also want to add the fact that being a teenager, again, the idea of turmoil, it's not enough that you're dealing with this turmoil of this outside world. Now you're becoming a teenager, and that in itself is this most confusing time of the growing process. And like you said, this naughtiness, and then you are discovering sexuality in the so it is this very and there's no one to guide you, and you're just finding your own way, just like there's no one to guide you through a war. You have to figure things out. So I would like to read books first, and it sort of gives you that sense of, like you said, growing up, this euphoric moments. It's called Books. We didn't go to school that day because a bomb was found still ticking near the cafeteria. We were euphoric, wild. Who said war didn't love the children? We were free to zigzag through parked cars, climb over walls, and move away from teachers who pretended that they loved us with their demonic rods. We ran toward the dead-end street where the trash rose 2 stories high. The stench fulfilled our wanderlust. We stopped. We couldn't wait to start a bonfire. Books of matches surfaced from each pocket. Ready, set. An underfed cat strolled between our matches and the heap of trash. Our eyes were burning. Someone kicked the belly of the cat. Another lit the pile of An-Nahr and some fed textbooks to the fire. We were the amber gods that day. We turned away from childhood, faced the smoke, and screamed much louder than the cat, the scorching rats, the maggots fed on flesh, and louder than the bomb that stopped ticking at last.
I think in these a number of poems, in a way, you bring us out into the war field from home, as if you're coming out. And you should, I mean, most people who haven't experienced the war, they think that, oh, Lebanon, it went through the civil war, it was horrible, whatever, but they don't have a sense of the reality, being up close in the face of death, of war, of shooting. And in a way, with your poems here, this collection, you show, or you transpose the reader into the feelings of the impact of death, the impact of the brutality. And there are, I think, a number of poems, perhaps if you read a few of them, that will really convey this sense of what it means to be in the middle of this destruction. I have in my friends the mosaic of the missing, discovery of the cycle, and you choose whichever, maybe two from this.
The one that I really, I mean, it's one of my, I shouldn't have a favorite poem in the book because they're all your children. You can't have a favorite.
Yeah.
But one that over the years, I've gone back to is The Last Mosque. And let me tell you why that means so much to me. It's because the mosque, which was right behind our apartment, we grew up in a neighborhood that predominantly were Armenians. We had the Armenian church very close by in Hajin. We had A lot of the businesses were Armenian. Yet, one of the most beautiful things that I've had one of the greatest gifts I've had as a child is the fact that behind our apartment was a railroad track, and it was very much secluded, where overgrown trees, bushes, and we as friends would jump the wall to go to the railroad track and to play there. One of the things was that we discovered there was a mosque, and again, my memory is I never saw this mosque in use. It was empty. It was completely, it was abandoned because the Muslim community had moved out of that area during the war. And that area had become predominantly Christian neighborhood. So we had this railroad and this beautiful mosque to go inside and play. And we used to play hide and go seek, and that hide and go seek motif also runs through the book, that we're constantly playing and hiding from things. And this one particularly is one of my favorites because it captures that moment. It captures the brutality, like you said, losing a friend. So I will read that. It's on page 24. It has two parts to it. The first part was written, I would say, about 15 years ago. The second part was written 15 weeks ago, right? Maybe right before the book. It's the last poem that I wrote for the book, the second part of this.
That's very interesting.
The Last Mosque, 1. When we heard the planes approach from the distance, Avo yelled in Armenian, "You guys, come out, the planes." He couldn't finish his sentence. We heard the first bomb explode near the bridge. I slid behind a curtain that smelled of mildew and urine. I didn't want to come out. The stained windows rattled during hide and seek. They always targeted me first. I didn't want to be found. "Come out," Avo yelled. "I'm not playing anymore." No one moved. In this abandoned house of worship, all 5 of us found a corner. Allah will protect us, I thought. Bombs won't destroy a minaret. Avo kept begging, "Guys, come out, please. It's not funny anymore." No one moved. The explosion set off sirens and car alarms. Allah is with us. Allah is with us. The mosque was our hiding place, even though I was a good Christian boy. The final explosion silenced everything, even Avo's voice. 2. Crossing the tracks, I held his left shoe, the canvas green and faded, mold on the bloody toe. The search party wanted to find pieces of Avo. His threadbare socks, shorts the shade of the Mediterranean, brown belt with tiny cowboys on it. On the telephone wire, I mistook the ragged Lebanese flag for his 1010 t-shirt. A broken Coke bottle reminded me of his reading glasses. In the blur of sunlight, the dead cat resembled his fisherman's hat. We ended the search when we found a trail of killer ants, a satchel of marbles, and a wet wallet with 3 liras stuck to a photo of Saint Charbel.
Yeah, I mean, it's unfortunately, I'm sure you've heard that the bridge of that railroad recently. I was actually in Beirut, walking on that street when a huge truck struck it down.
Yeah.
And it was horrific because it was like a monument. It was like this landmark that
Right.
everybody, identified with. It was, that's how you explained where you lived. That's all. To me, it was so emotional when I saw that bridge fell down and then removed it. So symbolically, unfortunately, that was also the destruction of neglect of Lebanon since the end of the civil war, but as if many wars have not ended in that country, unfortunately, and that symbolically the railroad and the bridge that you mentioned.
Yeah, I mean, I went back to Beirut in 2000, and I remember landing, and a friend picked me up and said, "Where do you want? What do you want to see first?" And I said, "The railroad bridge." Of course, I mean, there's no that I want to see the bridge, and it is. I mean, yes. And when that fell, when the bridge fell, what you were telling me about, right away, friends emailed me or texted me the pictures of it. It is you. The first time I saw it, your heart just breaks because it's almost like your childhood is being ripped out of you. So yes, I know exactly what you mean by
Yeah,
that feeling. So more poems will come about that later.
yeah. Shahé, I think I want to move into the second part of your book, which in a way, at least from my perspective, from boyhood, you're turning into a man or a person. It's like you're becoming an adult again in the background of the Civil War, and it's still there, but you're also dealing with your emotions, with your sexuality, and so on. Perhaps we could talk a little bit about that, and also, again, particularly in the Lebanese and Middle Eastern context, there is the corporal punishment in the schools or in the home, your first love, and so on. So maybe if you read one or two from this part, and we can delve deeper into it.
Yeah, corporal punishment. It's so interesting that we grew up in a country where if you didn't follow directions, you were beaten, and whenever you were misbehaving, you were beaten. And then I became a teacher, or you became a teacher, and completely you run away from that concept of, because you know the humiliation of that, you know how that felt, being called in front of the classroom, being asked to open your palm, and so many times they try to hit it and you pull your hand away, or they try to pull your sideburn, that whole humiliating world. But it's this, there are friends that I have from that, we all grew up together, and they all say, but nothing, you look at us, we're all good people, we all turned out to be good, but it's just, I don't know, being humiliated like that. What do you mean we turned out well? We didn't. We learned how to hide things really well. So
But
you're right. I will.
The fact that we don't live there and have the chance to reflect on the effects of that. But I think that brutality for the society there, living there, it kind of unfolds differently, or it has a different impact when someone has the chance to remove themselves from that environment and sort of reflect. So it's an interesting kind of debate, or now when you look at it, it really looks horrible that
Right.
those things. But
I mean, it's the lesser. It almost feels like it's the lesser of two evils. There's a war, and then at home you're getting a different kind of beating. At school you're getting a different. It's like, which one
but
is
also we didn't even dare tell our parents that my teacher beat me, because now second time you're gonna say, oh, so you were naughty and
right?
I don't really so.
You got a second beating at home because of, yeah. So this poem, and I think you're making reference to it, it's called "We Broke Rulers to Avenge Our Bleeding Knuckles."
Yes.
It's exactly that. It's that moment of getting caught, or you as a teenager, and we did this. One Sunday we jumped the wall of the school. We got in, and you know which school I'm talking about, right underneath the church. We got into the building. The doors, somehow the back door was open. We got in. And you would, what is the first thing you would do? You have the whole school to yourself, you're a little kid. We went to all those rulers that they used, and we broke every one of them and we threw them away. And funny enough, Monday morning, by afternoon, there were more rulers. I don't know how that happened. Where did that supply come from? But this is the poem that, again, it's one of my favorite poems because it takes me to that moment.
Yeah.
They shove us in line to investigate. My blue uniform feels tight, stiff. It's only Monday morning. I wonder if they'll catch us by Friday afternoon. I can't wiggle my toes in my uncle's hand-me-down shoes. He sells vinyl records near the bridge. I hum Dancing Queen to distract myself from the probing eye of the principal. Mother made me eat 2 boiled eggs this morning. I taste leftovers tucked between the gaps of my teeth. I close my eyes to review the stupid poem I memorized the night before. They could never read my heart. We broke rulers as altar boys when we played hooky from church. We removed the window screen that separated the alley from the classroom. On Sundays, we were kings, but today we're questions, threatened. They pulled my sideburns, but I don't care. I would die first. They can give me 1,000 poems to memorize, 1,000,000 standards to write over and over. I will not break rulers. I will not break rulers. I will not break rulers.
Yes, I think many of us identify with that second punishment of writing the same sentence 300 times, pages and pages. But I think let's talk a lot about your first love, the poem First Love, because it's not all this brutality and this kind of the black world, even though the war and poverty is in the background, but also there is this sense of coping mechanism of the person who's trying to live a life, go through the stages despite what's around, especially the poverty, which is still a problem in Lebanon, especially these days. It's a major problem for people to survive the economic downturn and so on. So I think First Love is a good one to hear you read.
Yeah, Raj. And the interesting thing is what makes the book, to me, at least when I read it, what makes it light is when you talk about love, which is so interesting that in the most horrific situations, love makes it bearable, the world around us. And the First Love is about that, the fact that, yeah, the world might be falling apart, but then you have this.
Yeah.
Her smile made him forget all the hungry children in the ghettos of Beirut, all the mothers scavenging for rotten vegetables at the chicken market, all the fathers who carried defective guns to protect water pipes, bridges, milk trucks, and wounded hospitals. Her smile added a bounce to his walk, a hop and a skip over dead pigeons, skeletal cats, and rats that chewed on shoestrings. He dodged bullets in alleys and blew kisses at snipers who used sandbags to veil their eyes. He stole lilies from sidewalk shrines with melted candle wax on drooping petals. She smiled.
Wonderful, wonderful. I think we have a few more minutes left, but I want to make sure that uh, you read at least 2 or 3 more poems, because I think they're very powerful. Uh, Towards the end of the book, as it were, even though again it wasn't written, chronologically or as a sequential thing, but I think it's a nice, the way it has been put together. It has a progression, as it were. I think towards the end, the reader feels the reconciliation, kind of coming to terms with many of these questions that the child had and the teenager went through. So as a person, as a mature person, there is this sort of intaking deeper breath and making sense and reflection. And interestingly, there is a reconciliation with the father, and then the parents again, the mother. So if you want, I'd like you to read Inner City with Father and History of Forgetfulness, which is about the mother.
Yeah, Inner City with Father does happen many years later after the war, obviously. It's right before when my father was passing. And it happens in Los Angeles, so we're very much removed from the craziness. It's almost sets up for the next book that I'm working on, which is about Los Angeles, growing up as a teenager coming to Los Angeles. Inner City with Father. In our last conversation, he sat on a milk crate, held the unlit cigarette like a fountain pen, and kept tapping the filter against his weak heart, as if he wanted to offer a final walkthrough inside his chambers, dispose the melted snow of Mount Ararat, wrapped the warped Comanche of Sayat Nova in rags, tuck Mama's grape leaves like love letters in the left vertical. Beethoven blocked a coronary and a cadenza full of sonnets pushed against his aorta. That's the ashen smoke of Beirut. That's the bloated bridge of Bourges. And that's you, he said, my failing tourniquet. And the other poem that
I wanted to, before you read History of Forgetfulness, because that's the title of the book as well, tell us about the title of this poem and then how it became the title of the book.
Well, again, History of Forgetfulness is the poem that was written when Mother was in Los Angeles. It's no longer in Beirut. And Mother started, toward the end of her life, she started going through dementia, and she started forgetting things. And this poem is during the early part of her battle with dementia. And it was so interesting. She used it it almost felt like she used it for her advantage. When she wanted to forget something, she acted like she doesn't remember. Whenever she wanted to remember something, she remembered perfectly. So this is a poem that, to me, that again, this balance between remembering and forgetting. And Mother, ironically, she goes into this dementia world of dementia, where she starts forgetting. Whether she wants to or not, she starts forgetting. And the title of the book, I remember I used to read this poem during poetry readings around LA, and friends used to come and tell me, this should be the title of your book. This should be the title of your book. And sure enough, it is, even though it doesn't take place in Beirut. It's hindsight. So it's called History of Forgetfulness. She might finally forget my name when she's dicing onions on a chopping block. For now, mother can't pinpoint my daughter's birthday. She recites random months like January and August until I remind her it's in July. She forgets to swallow her blood pressure pills, so she leaves church early. After she calms her heart, she drinks Turkish coffee. No one knows why she clips coupons for Campbell's tomato soup. She makes illegal U-turns just to make sure the burner under the pressure cooker is off. She can't sleep at night because when she closes her eyes, she remembers everything.
Yeah, I think to me also the title History of Forgetfulness, in my mind, it also reflected on Lebanon, because Lebanon is also a history of forgetting what has happened in the past, and they keep repeating the same mistakes and the tragedy that has taken place. So I think in the larger context, at least in my mind, it resonated with the overall theme of your book as well. And I think because of time, we have to conclude, but I cannot not ask you the question why your final poem is a conversation with Taha Muhammad, a Palestinian, well-known Palestinian and powerful poet. So let's conclude with your reflection, why this conversation, and maybe we'll end it, our conversation with reading the poem.
Yeah, Taha Muhammad Ali is definitely one of my favorite poets. And I had the great pleasure of meeting him out of all places in New Jersey. In the woods, there was a festival. I went, he's there. I wanted to say hello to him. He read one of my favorite poems that day. And I tried to run behind there was a large tent, and I went behind the tent and I saw him coming out. And I ran up to him, I said, Taha Muhammad Ali, and he doesn't know English. He needs a translator. And I said, you meant so much to me. He immediately, he gave me a hug. He'll realize that we are from the same background. And he asked me about my father, and I said, my father is from Haifa, which is very familiar to him. He's from Nazareth, but I think he worked in Haifa. And I said, we started talking through the translator as much as we could. He even gave me one of his Arabic poetry books signed. And our conversation stayed with me for many years. And I thought it is a great place to end this book. It's about, well, the book starts with, I read the book with he lives, he lives, he lives, those three words. And the book ends with dying. It's a burial of someone. So we open with life and sort of we end it with death, or trying to bury something that hasn't been buried yet. It's called Conversation with Taha Muhammad Ali. I tell him my father is from Haifa. I already know this from your hazel eyes. Your mother must have drank olive oil during pregnancy. He smiles. Who's your father? Nazareth. Like my city, he says, but no coincidence. You and I have the same wild blueberries, pomegranates, and black pitless cherries in our blood. I misunderstand pitiless. I say father died in 94. I know this, he says, because you never buried him. He still lives in your tongue. when you come to Nazareth, will lay him to rest behind the church, deep in the overgrown lilacs.
Wonderful, Shahé. Thank you so much for sharing with us your most intimate thoughts, feelings, and for bringing us or taking us on a journey rather into your own world. Very difficult through the war, through the civil war. And I hope this would be a must read for anyone who wants to understand the Middle East, especially Lebanon. And I very much hope that this would be a required reading for history classes, political science, sociology, and all kinds of courses that teach about war, destruction, but also in the end, reconciliation. Thank you so much. And
thank you, Raj. I mean, I really, really enjoyed our conversation. Thank you for taking the time out, saying these great things and making me think. And again, Armenian Institute and IALA for making this conversation happen. I thoroughly enjoyed it. Thank you, everyone, and friends and family who are here, and people that I don't know, who I consider my friends. Sincerely, thank you. Thank you for.
we look forward to your next book, Shahé.
Working on it.
Yeah. I think now we are going to take some questions from the audience.
Yes, if everyone will just unmute and join me in giving a round of applause to both our host and our reader. Thank you both. I've obviously read the book on paper, but it was the poems are so powerful when you read them aloud. And Koertge, thank you for leading us through this conversation and allowing Shahé's poems to shine through. If I can begin, I've been reading this since the fall, slowly, to sort of enjoy the poems in all of their details, and the specificity of the details really stuck with me. For example, you write, in Brioches in Beirut, you write, no one tasted the difference between glass shards and sugar beads piercing the bloated belly of brioches. And then later on, you speak of graffiti, make Allah your lavender. And those, I just can't get these details out of my head. There are so many smells and sounds. And I'd like to ask you about your writing process and how it relates to your memory. Did these details, like Abo's canvas shoe, did they stick with you through the decades, or did you construct them in the process of writing and remembering? And if so, was there catharsis in this remembering?
It's all of the above, but one of the things that I like to do as a writer, and a lot of writers do this, I think, we're storytellers, and even my poems, I would like them to tell a story. I'm not, a lot of the modern poets have moved away from this concept. It becomes very language-based, but mine, it has to tell a story. That's one. Two, very young, when I was taking poetry writing classes, one of my professors, Koertge, said, make your writing filmable. And that stuck with me. What do you mean filmable? That means if there was a camera and it was trying to, and he used to say this, line by line, it has to be able, you should be able to film your lines. If you can't film it, then it's too vague. So that stuck to me as a young man, that, okay, I have to be precise with my language. It can't be just colorful flowers. It has to be a red flower, or it has to be a red rose, let's say. But then you have to be very careful about the cliches. So it's been a challenge to think that way, but then it makes language so much more playful, and I enjoy doing that as I'm writing. Do I change things? Do I play with my memory? Absolutely, all writers do. And there people ask me, is this true? And sometimes I don't tell them, because what is true? We blend the truth with fiction, and that's where something beautiful comes out. So I don't know if I answered it, but images are very, very important because it has to be filmable.
Absolutely, that's great advice, and they're very visual poems. If anyone has questions, please raise your hand or unmute yourself, or you can type them into the chat.
What I'd like to suggest to remove the spotlights, because it's such a nice intimate group, so it will be more democratic book club setting.
Sure. And we have one, oh, do I do that myself? We have one question from Albert Kapikian. Albert says, you spoke of the significance of the epigraph from Jibran. Thank you. Could you do the same for the epigraph that begins part 2 and its significance for the title? You have not forgotten to remember, you have remembered to forget. Such an eerie quote.
Yeah, again, this, I love, I mean, you can just sit there and meditate on this line where am I forgetting, or am I trying to remember, or am I trying to forget to remember? It's this cycle that you just, and to me, again, these lines that just make, a friend of mine said there are times where you just put the book aside because you just want to meditate on lines. And to me, this was like meditation as I was writing. Am I trying to remember? Am I trying to forget? Which is it? So it captures my state of mind perfectly as I was writing the book. You have not forgotten to remember, you have remembered to forget. As you're remembering to forget, you're actually putting these images on paper. So I just love that quote, and it stuck with me, and it was on my desk throughout the time that I was writing.
Thank you. Nairi, our mentee from your program, asks,
Right.
I would like to ask you about the process of writing. Did you visit Lebanon to somehow renew your memory, in quotes, and start writing? You mentioned you visited in 2000.
No, I mean, I tried to, as much as possible, try to remember. That was the exercise. I try to, even when I went back to Beirut, that memory of Beirut was not the Beirut that I remember as a child. So it never got into the way of writing this book. I constantly went back to those childhood memories. There were times where it was very painful to just sit there and remember. But I guess that was the exercise, and that was part of being truthful to what I was trying to do. There were times where I would probably email a friend saying, am I correct that there was that store right next to the barber shop? And I would get an email back, yes, no. But in general, it was stories that not. The other part of this that I never talked about was the fact that a lot of friends who grew up with me in that region, they would come and tell me stories about their childhood. And those stories, especially if they're intriguing and interesting, I would steal from them. I would borrow them. I would take them in, and it becomes my story. And sometimes you would not know which is which. And there have been friends who have emailed me saying, I know that story. I know that poem. I know where that came from. Because we sat around and we talked about these moments in our lives. So just because it's the first person, that doesn't necessarily mean that every single poem in this book happened directly to me.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? Nancy Agabian. Hi, Nancy. She writes, you have been writing about war for a while. I wonder what you think of the concept of self-care, a term we didn't have when we first started writing. How do you deal with writing difficult or traumatic memories?
Well, I think there's two ways of doing this. One is, again, we come back to the idea of forgetting. And it's easy to forget. You don't have to deal with that part of your life. Or sometimes we sugarcoat it, like I made a reference to it earlier, where, when teachers were being beating us, or if mom and dad were, we try to forget that. And the way we sort of meditate ourselves is, or medicate ourselves is the fact that, well, we didn't turn out bad people, and we turned out okay. And so mom and dad or the teacher, they didn't do a bad job of us. We turned out okay. But I think for writers, for Nancy as well, she does this quite a lot in her writing. You have to visit those moments. You have to put closure to them. Otherwise you will carry it with, and it's going to manifest itself in ways that you're not going to like, or it's not going to be pleasant. So I believe in visiting those moments that it's very difficult to talk about. And sometimes poetry has to be difficult to read. It has to be that you read a line that you have to put it aside and just walk away. That's what good writing or literature does. Those are the writers that I respect, that they make me struggle with things that I don't want to struggle. I want to run away from. So I think that's part of literature. And going through that process, you heal. And I think that's also critical, that you're not going to heal if you don't talk about it or you don't write about it. So I don't know if I answered Nancy's question, but I think that's the part about visiting those moments and writing about it and healing afterwards.
Thank you. Celeste, do you want to unmute yourself?
Yeah, I did. Thank you so much, Shahé. These are just so rich and fertile. And just to continue on that thought, I wonder what you have to say about the form of poetry allows us as writers to go into that memory, but allows for a different kind of healing because of its form, the container of the poem rather than some other form.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I love the compactness of poetry, that you have this limited space to say what you have to say, and it just forces you to be economical. Yet in that economy, you have to say so much, so much more. I've tried many times to write a short story or attempt a novel. I have too many pages. I love the economy of poetry. I love the fact that you have to say what you have to say in this compact genre, and you just forces you to work harder. I feel like you work harder to write these short things than writing the short story or a novel. It just, I don't know, that's, and I love the playfulness of it. You just become a child again, and you're playing with words, you move words around, you look for another word to say the same, you avoid repetitions, which, in novels or in short stories, you don't have to, but it dictates you to be very careful with your word choices. It takes me to a happy place when I'm writing poetry.
Thank you.
Thank you. Lori, you have a question. I see Lori's hand.
Hi, Shahé, it's Lori.
Hi,
Congratulations.
Lori.
Hi, Hokis. William Archila, my husband, has a question.
William.
Okay, go ahead.
I'll ask my question as soon as I'm allowed to talk. Hold on a second. Shahé, this is wonderful news. I'm so happy for you.
Thank you, William. Thank you. It means so much coming from you.
I just have a very simple question. I was wondering, how do you balance the writing life, your writing life, and family life, and also holding a job? Last time I checked, I think you were still the principal, right? So I'm wondering, how do you manage all those three components?
Very hard, and I know you're in the same place as I am. It's very difficult. We have to carve moments, time. Mine is usually very early in the morning. I get up 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning and I write. That's my writing time. I know that on Sundays I write regularly. Sunday mornings, again, is when I'm working. Otherwise, it is very difficult to manage, work and family life. And most of the writer friends like you, we all share the same situation, is the fact that we just have to find our time and be disciplined about it, and just
Very disciplined.
do it and just continue doing what we do. That's why for us, some of us, writing a book, it takes about 10 years versus someone who doesn't have those responsibilities, they can do it in a shorter period of time.
Yeah. Shahé, may I also ask a question, twofold?
Sure.
Thank you. So my question is, now that your fantastic debut collection is out, so necessary, so wonderful, do you feel that here in the United States, do you feel that things are open to your voice, our voices, people who write what you write? Is the community, is the canon, is it open enough? Is it accepting enough of our voices, or is there still work to be done? And that's the question.
Oh, Lori, this is something very close. I think there's a lot more work to be done. I almost feel like, I don't want to criticize the country that I live in, but I almost feel like every publisher has one sample of every minority, and that's all they want, just one or two. It was so difficult to publish this book in the US. It never got published in the US. And it was finalist to a lot of competitions, but never got published here. And then I reached out to a publisher in the UK, and right away they responded to it. And all these years that I remember Lori used to come to me and you would say, Shai, when is your book getting published?
Yeah,
Well,
oh yeah.
I was trying very hard to get it to happen in the US, and it never did. So I think there's a lot more work to be done here. Just because publisher has one South American writer, one African American writer, doesn't mean that they filled the quota. There's a lot more voices to be acknowledged, and I don't think we're doing a good job of acknowledging them.
Right. Well, thank God for the UK.
Yeah, I mean, in this situation, absolutely.
Thank God for the UK, but also for the Armenian Institute, because it's so wonderful to see so many writers here in this conversation. And I just want to say thank you to Tatavik for giving us a platform to share our work, to talk about it. It's so important, and it really warms my heart. So I think I can speak for Shahé and all of us at IALA to just say thank you for giving us this opportunity.
Well, thank you, IALA, for existing. I love working with you. It makes me so proud as a British Armenian in London to see Shah's book published here. I can't wait to go to bookshops to see it there, Shahé. I hope you can come and see the copy of your book in our library, donated by Herash Chilingirian, by the way.
Thank you for that so much.
Yeah. Can I ask a question on this note while I'm unmuted? Because I have millions of questions, and I had to turn my video off a few times because your poems made me so teary, and my heart is full with your words and all the images. I'm humbled to hear you allowed us to your childhood, and you shared all your pain, beautiful memories, ugly memories with us. And Stan Sivi used this phrase "Tsavet so often, let me take your pain away." And I felt we'll share the pain a bit, and it all enriched us in a way. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
And while your poetry collection is in English, it reminds me a lot of our Armenian greats. It reminds me the darkness of Aruzhan's poems, and particularly one poem, In My Father's Prison, when as a child he visited that prison, and it shaped him. It shaped all of his writing. And it reminds me a lot of Hamosahian, a very different poet. the lightness and his ease of using the language, writing about simplest thing in most beautiful ways. And I wanted to ask you, who are your inspirations? Which poets you love or who shape your work?
Wow. Again, the poets that I love and are the poets that I work with, the poets that I workshop with. They definitely are the ones that are shaping continually my work. Aline is here. I see Aline is here. Mary is here. Armine, I don't know if Armine Ignatosyan is here. Lori, William. These are people that I constantly see. I constantly hear their work. So yes, I mean, when I was in undergrad or graduate work, of course, we read all the canon of the British and the American writers. And yes, they shaped my, they put the foundation of my writing, but being honest, are the people who I am constantly having dialogue with. And these are the people in Los Angeles who I workshop with regularly. They bring their poems, I read their poems, they read my poems, we comment on each other's work. So these are the individuals who have shaped my writing and they will continue, hopefully, in the coming years to shape Lola Conduction wrote the Zephyr Poets, and Lola's poems, Lola's wonderful website that she has, that she makes things available for us to read from Armenian poets and who are writing in Armenian or they're writing in other languages. But it's, these are the women and men who are shaping my writing continually.
Thank you, Shai. Just a very quick little promotional break. In 2 weeks' time, you will have an opportunity to learn from Lola. She'll be running a workshop for the Armenian Institute. And there's another fabulous event with Lola coming up about her father's photography, which she's kindly donating to the Armenian Institute along with her brother, Viken Kondakjian. So please check our website and please join us. We'll be in person and virtually as well.
Aline, did you have a question? I see your hand.
I do. I'm so proud of you, Shahé. Congratulations. This is such an amazing, when that book hit my doorstep, I swear I was shaking with such joy because I'm so happy to see all of these poems come to fruition in this way. I wanted to ask you about many of these poems. Of course, every time we workshop, it's very personal to you. There's stories about your family, your mother, your father, your friends growing up, but there's also poetry of protest underneath it too. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about how you think your poems may lead to change, it's as a protest against systems and injustices.
Well, Aline, very good question. And I know Koertge kept talking about this, the fact that not much has changed in Lebanon. Not much has changed since 1975. Almost 50 years have gone by. And we still read about Beirut. We still, you and I, we still go back to writing about Lebanon because of what we are seeing, the images that we see, either on the internet or on the evening news. And enough is enough. You just want to scream, enough is enough. Give this country a break. And there are so many players with so many hands involved that when one just stops going into the jar, another person, it's almost like they're waiting in line. Who's going to be the one that's going to damage this country more? And then again, it's a universal idea. It's not only we're seeing this in Beirut, Lebanon, we see this in Armenia. We saw this conflict brewing there. It's not much different. And again, the victims are the children in these countries who are constantly witnessing this horrible atrocities that over and over in the hands of adults, where I was reading somewhere where, in classrooms, teachers tell children that you have to be good, you have to be peace-loving, you have to be honest, you have to take care of your country. And then these children watch these adults outside of the classroom. No one's doing what they're not doing what they're saying. They're not, outside of the classroom, outside of the teachers saying these things. Men, women, men in power are still misbehaving and still causing destruction. So it is a protest. It is, children are becoming victims, and these children will become adults, and they will continue this vicious cycle if we don't stop, if we don't say enough is enough.
Thank you,
I don't know
Shahé.
yeah.
We have one last question in the chat from Ani Duzdabanyan Manukian. She writes, do you think that you needed all these years to pass until you would be able to write about war?
I think so. I think maturity has to come in. You have to have a distance from the subject in order for you to clearly write about it. Definitely the adult perspective makes the writer look back at the child and sort of help the child move along, help the child see things that the child missed. So it's a conversation between an adult and a child, the author talking back with that 12-year-old or having that conversation with the 10-year-old or the 8-year-old and saying things will be okay. So it was very much important to have that distance, to have that, being an adult definitely helps see things in a lot more clearer. And it will distort things too, which is interesting as well.
Thank you. Tatevik?
Yes, very reluctantly, I'm closing this event because we could go on, and I wish you were all sitting in our library at the Armenian Institute with a glass of wine. So let's hope it can happen very soon. Huge thank you to you, Shahé. Huge thank you for your beautiful, gorgeous poetry. And I'm wearing a filmmaker hat, and I promise you it is filmable. I saw every line. It was the wonderful line about someone walking in Arabic. I was like, oh, wow, in one of your poems. So thank you again, and thank you for sharing and reading.
Thank you for
Koertge, thank you. I know your love of poetry. I know how much you enjoyed this conversation. Being a Beiruti lover of poetry, this is it. And a huge thank you to IALA, and probably most of you know all about IALA and everyone watching on Facebook as well. If you don't know much about them, please check out their website. They are the most wonderful new organization. I think as an Armenian, we all had a conversation where we go, there is no one doing anything. We need a new organization. We need fresh blood. IALA is that organization. Since the foundation by Olivier Katranjian, they've been working tirelessly. I've been involved in some of them programs. They're wonderful. Please support these people. And one last thing on the poetry note about the Armenian Institute. We turned 20 years recently, and as Koertge, as someone who was there at the very beginning, can be my witness. And our fundraiser for 20th anniversary is just ending, so we prepared a little gift for everyone, whether you donate it or not. So it's a little digitized book translated by Misha Kudyan. It's a beautiful anthology of Soviet Armenian poetry. Why don't I share the link in the chat? It's free at the moment on Kindle. So please read it, enjoy it. And we have more books to come, digitized, accessible to everyone. So thank you, keep in touch. And thank you, Olivia, for all your ideas and friendship.
Thank you, Tato, and thank you, Koertge and Shahé. This was such a magical evening. So
you.
Have a good night. Have a good morning.
Thank you, everyone.